He did have work was music that I made with Dre, not with Game release. How We Do, Hate It or Love It, Church for Thugs, Special, Higher, West Side Story.
From the back room, and he shot twice more, and I got shot in the ankle, and then I got shot in the stomach too. And then I thought he was gonna come up and just, give me the dome shot or the kill, the kill shot. So I just closed my eyes.
2001, around the same time Dre dropped 2001. Game lyric, right?
Yeah, that was a lyric.
Are you about to tell me that 2001 didn't come out in 2001?
It did not.
Came out in 99.
What Up Gangsta?
What Up Gangsta,
Yeah, I'm like, come on, bro. He wasn't even around when we did that. Like, that was before you even came into the picture. Like, that's Get Rich or Die Trying. He didn't even
come into after that.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Gossip Channel. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We're growing with you and because of you. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Once we hit that milestone, a special prize will be waiting for you. Stay tuned. And now, let's get into the topic. For years, the game's been spinning stories that just don't line up. And the craziest part? It ain't the fans calling him out, it's other rappers. From bragging that he wrote 50 Cent's What Up Gangsta, to flexing a clearly photoshopped picture with Tupac, to even shading Dr. Dre, the man who literally handed him his career. The drama really kicks off with one of his boldest claims yet, saying he actually wrote part of 50 Cent's classic anthem, What Up Gangsta. Now, if you know hip-hop history, you know how wild that claim is. What Up Gangsta wasn't just some filler track, it was the opener to Get Rich or Die Trying, the album that crowned 50 as untouchable, dangerous, and 100% authentic. To say you had a hand in building that moment, you better pull out some serious receipts. When the question popped up in an interview, 50's reaction said it all. He didn't just deny it, he straight up laughed. His body language was screaming, "Are you for real right now?" For 50, that track was his baby. His voice, his pen, his raw aggression. And he wasn't the only one shutting the rumor down. Tony Yayo, who was right there in the studio when Get Rich or Die Trying was being made, didn't hold back either. His clapback was cold and clear. You didn't write nothing. No room for debate, no sugarcoating. But here's why that claim shook the culture so hard. According to 50, not only did Game have zero to do with What Up Gangsta, his whole career wouldn't have even existed without him and Dre. Dre handpicked the beats, 50 laced the hooks, and G-Unit scattered features all over the documentary. The blueprint was already finished before Game ever stepped in the booth. Just think about it. Hate It or Love It and How We Do, two of Game's biggest hits, were actually 50 Cent's records first. They didn't just help launch him, they built him. Dre's ear, 50's pen, and G-Unit's presence made Game who he was. That cosign gave Game the stamp he needed to break out of Compton and straight into the mainstream spotlight. Dre's beats, 50's hooks, and G-Unit's weight put him on the map with joints like West Side Story. So when Game later tried to flip the script, acting like he shaped 50's work, or that he would have thrived without those cosigns, it wasn't just rewriting history. It came off flat out disrespectful. Especially when you're talking about 50 and Dre, two men who guard their legacies like treasure chests. That's why the claims hit so hard. It wasn't just random fans rolling their eyes. It was the same people who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Game on his come-up, now shutting him down in public. The idea that Game was pumping up his own role didn't just spark friction, it made people ask the real question. What else has he been lying about? And that takes us straight to one of the most infamous chapters in his whole mythology, the night he got shot. If his fallout with 50 raised eyebrows, then Game's so-called survival story raised them even higher. For years, he's retold the story of the night he was gunned down inside his own home. But depending on which version you catch, it feels less like a memory and more like a Hollywood movie script. The core of it goes like this. Back in 2001, Game was ambushed, hit with multiple shots, and left fighting for his life. The idea that Game was pumping up his own role didn't just spark friction, it made people ask the real question. What else has he been lying about? And that takes us straight to one of the most infamous chapters in his whole mythology, the night he got shot. If his fallout with 50 raised eyebrows, then Game's so-called survival story raised them even higher. For years, he's retold the story of the night he was gunned down inside his own home. But depending on which version you catch, it feels less like a memory and more like a Hollywood movie script. The core of it goes like this. Back in 2001, Game was ambushed, hit with multiple shots, and left fighting for his life. He says he slipped into a coma, woke up days later, and from that moment, vowed to chase rap like his life depended on it. On the surface, it's the perfect redemption arc hip-hop loves. The streets nearly kill you, but the music swoops in and saves you. But here's the catch. The details never stay the same. Sometimes he swears he was shot 5 times. Other times, it jumps to 7. In one version, he's left bleeding on the floor for hours before help comes. In another, his brother rushes in right away and saves him. Even the length of the coma flips. 3 days in one telling, weeks in another. The story keeps shifting like it's being remixed, and people started noticing. The hospital records and news reports back up that he got shot. But when the details keep flipping, the story stops sounding like truth and starts sounding like straight-up theater. Naturally, fans began tearing through every contradiction, and soon the slip-ups got too big to ignore. Take the infamous lyric, "I woke up out the coma, 2001. The issue? Dr. Dre's album 2001 had already dropped back in 1999. The timeline just don't add up. And in hip-hop, when your whole image is built on authenticity, cracks like that don't stay small. They blow up into massive flaws everybody points at. Even hip-hop commentators couldn't resist tearing into him. Joe Budden and others clowned him non-stop, pointing out how the timeline magically shifts every single time Game retells it. To them, the issue wasn't whether he actually got shot. It was the way he exaggerated, trying to frame himself as the West Coast's answer to 50 Cent's legendary 9-shot story. And that's the real problem here. When your personal story becomes your entire brand, every little inconsistency makes people question everything else you've ever said. By this point, Game was already sitting on 2 strikes against his credibility. First, inflating his role in 50's come up, and second, stretching the truth about his own near-death saga. But here's the kicker. Neither of those slip-ups could match what came next. Because years later, the streets started whispering that Game wasn't just twisting the truth about himself. He went after the very man who gave him a career in the first place, Dr. Dre. By then, Game had already been grilled over his origin story, his shooting, and even his ties to Kanye and Dre. You'd think he'd be more careful about what came out his mouth, but nope. What he said next shocked hip-hop to the core and became one of his most controversial, maybe even unforgivable statements. In an interview moment that instantly spread across social media, Game dropped a bomb that had everybody talking. He said, "It's crazy that Ye did more for me in the last 2 weeks than Dre did for me my whole career." A line that cut deep, throwing shade at his own mentor and comparing Dre, the man who built him, to Kanye, who had only just stepped into the picture. For fans and industry insiders, that line wasn't just another one of Game's wild quotes. It felt like straight-up betrayal. Because no matter how you slice it, one thing can't be denied: Dr. Dre was the architect of Game's career from day one. Back in 2003, Dre signed him to Aftermath, handed him production, mentorship, and most importantly, the right placement to blow up big. Alongside Jimmy Iovine, Dre was the mastermind who lined him up with 50 Cent and G-Unit, a move that guaranteed mainstream spotlight. The payoff? The documentary, a debut that didn't just succeed, it went 5 times platinum and cemented Game's place in rap history. Grammy nods and a locked-in spot in rap history, none of that happens without Dre's stamp. That's why the hip-hop world reacted instantly when Game threw shade. Tony Yayo didn't bite his tongue either. His response was brutal. "You have a career because of Dr. Doctor, you're on record saying, what the f am I without a doctor?" Dre track? What are you even talking about? That's crazy you just dissed Dre like that. To Yayo, and to countless fans, Game's comment wasn't just reckless, it came off ungrateful. But the question still lingers. Why would he say it at all? Some say the roots trace back to the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show where Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, and yes, even 50 Cent lit up the stage for one of the most iconic hip-hop performances of all time, without Game anywhere in sight. But Game, he was nowhere to be found. At first, he played it cool, acting like the Super Bowl snub didn't faze him. But later, in podcasts and interviews, the mask slipped. He admitted it stung. The truth came out. Being left off that stage made him feel abandoned by both Dre and 50. To some, that whole Kanye did more for me comment wasn't about facts at all. It was pure hurt talking. But by then, the damage was already done. Even when Game tried to walk it back, blaming the liquor or saying he still considered Dre a blessing, the sting of those words stuck to his name. The damage was already stamped in the culture. Sure, Game later admitted Dre had done things no one else could ever do for his career. Sure, he even said he should have shown more respect. But in hip-hop, once you disrespect a legend, especially your own mentor, those words don't vanish. What fans saw as pain spilling out just turned into yet another crack in Game's shaky credibility. First came the 50 Cent drama, then the ever-changing shooting story. And now, Dr. each scandal chipped away at his image, and instead of looking like a survivor, he started looking like someone constantly rewriting his own history. And if that wasn't enough, his very next move only dragged him deeper, in a desperate attempt to keep himself tied to the West Coast legacy. Reaching for royalty, Game leaned heavy on Tupac's legacy, but the way he did it blew up in his face. A photoshopped picture of him and Pac side by side started floating online. At first glance, some people thought it was real, a rare, never-before-seen moment of Pac standing with the Compton rapper, the kind of image that, if legit, could have crowned Game as Pac's heir. But the internet don't play. Fans zoomed in quick. The shadows looked wrong, Pac's chain looked copy-pasted, and the proportions just weren't adding up. Within hours, the whole thing got exposed as fake, turning what could have been a powerful legacy link into pure embarrassment. What was meant to be a tribute turned into a straight-up meme overnight. Blogs clowned it, message boards went wild, and fans accused Game of trying way too hard. Instead of looking like Pac's natural successor, he came off like someone desperately forcing the comparison. And the timing couldn't have been worse. He had just fallen out with Dre and was already bleeding credibility in the industry. That Photoshop was supposed to scream, "I'm still part of this West Coast legacy." But instead, it became proof that his spot wasn't nearly as secure as he wanted people to believe. Even Pac's die-hard fans, who usually celebrate tributes, voiced their disappointment loud. To them, Tupac wasn't just an icon, he was sacred, and faking a connection crossed the line. Manipulating his image, even if he claimed it was a tribute, came off like straight exploitation.
Best and most extravagant lies we've ever heard in our lives on this episode.
I'm with you.
Rapper that nobody ever wants a problem with, including myself, man. Eminem is like the most lyrically insane. Even when I was going at 50 and me and Dre wasn't seeing eye to eye, man, I stayed away.
Song called The Black Slim Shady.
Right.
You heard it?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
How can you diss Eminem? He sold 16 million records. You're not bigger than 50, you're not bigger than Eminem. You dropped a 20-minute Eminem record and nobody really paid attention to it.
You heard him say Kanye did more for me in the last 2 weeks than Dr. Dre did mine.
One fan nailed it online. If Pac was alive, he wouldn't need Photoshop. That single line summed up the backlash perfectly. Real recognizes real. And this move, it didn't feel real at all. But here's the twist. Not every play Game made was about flat-out lies or cheap beef. Some moves came from something deeper, a desperate cling to stay relevant. And that chase pulled him out of Dre's shadow, past the ghost of Tupac, and straight into the orbit of two massive names in rap history, Kendrick Lamar and Eminem. And with Game, you already know, feuds aren't just background noise, they become the headline. They've shaped his whole career, beyond the famous blow-ups with 50 Cent and Dr. Dre. There's a clear pattern of a man forever battling for relevance, often cashing out pieces of his own credibility to stay in the spotlight. And nowhere is this more obvious than with Kendrick Lamar and Eminem. Take Kendrick, for example. On Black Boy Fly, Kendrick showed nothing but respect, saluting Game while also calling himself a witness to Snoop Dogg passing the torch to him. It was a symbolic moment for the new West Coast generation. The two even shared tracks and rocked stages together, and for a moment, it looked like Game had finally locked himself in as the bridge between eras. But here's the thing. Respect has never been enough for Game. He's rarely satisfied unless the spotlight burns directly on him. Even with Kendrick showing him love, whispers started floating that Game tried to downplay Kendrick's skills, whether out of competitiveness, jealousy, or just pure hunger to keep his own name lit in the spotlight. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because the same script played out with Eminem. At first, Game couldn't stop praising M. He called him the only rapper nobody ever wants a problem with, and even admitted, "I used to think Eminem was better than me." But years later, he flipped it completely, suddenly challenging Eminem to a versus, dismissing his relevance, and throwing out disses that felt less like real smoke and more like a staged publicity stunt to grab attention. And that pattern, admiration flipping into confrontation, respect turning into rivalry, sits right at the core of Game's story with Kendrick. It really showed itself during the Kendrick versus Drake feud, when Game threw all his weight behind Drake, even calling him his brother, while skipping out on a West Coast unity show that Kendrick hosted with Eminem. It looked less like loyalty and more like he was trying to bait hip-hop's most untouchable figure into a showdown that never happened. But the outcome, the same every time. Game left on the outside looking in. So when Kendrick hit the Super Bowl halftime stage in 2022, standing tall with Dre, Snoop, Eminem, and even 50 Cent, Game was nowhere in sight. Shut out once again. He admitted the snub stung, even went as far as calling Kendrick a safe pick. And when he tried to spark the internet by dissing Eminem, expecting an explosion, M's response was pure silence. He brushed it off on Instagram Live while fans roasted Game for trying way too hard. Now the talk among fans is that Game's stuck in a pattern. He takes respect and flips it into rivalry, stirring controversy just to keep his name buzzing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it backfires, but every time it feeds the same picture. A talented rapper whose toughest battles come from his own obsession with proving he still matters, and that sets the stage for the next twist. Game getting called out publicly by another rapper named Spar. Spar came out saying he paid for a feature, but never got what he was promised, and he wasn't the only one pointing fingers. A fan even commented, "Game charging $4,000 for a verse, bro, is down bad." To many, this wasn't the same Game who once stood tall as a West Coast hero. This was a whole different picture, an artist hustling, not for the culture, but just to survive. The accusations started stacking up, and with every new claim, the gap between his glory days and his current reality only grew wider. Whether you call it business or straight desperation, one thing was clear. The legend who once carried Compton pride was now being questioned in ways fans never thought they'd see. But here's the turn. Controversy wasn't the only thing putting cracks in Game's legacy. There was something else, something that had been lurking from the very beginning. After the $4,000 feature scandal, the pattern was impossible to ignore. First, it was his credibility, then his loyalty, and now his reputation taking hits. And just when it looked like Game might finally regroup, another old habit came back into the spotlight. One that had always been there, but now was drawing sharper criticism: name dropping. Here's where it gets wild. Game would publicly claim he didn't need to name drop, and then keep on doing it anyway. That contradiction drove people crazy, and it's the very thing that made other rappers lose patience. Because Game built a whole reputation off constantly dropping heavyweight names like Dr., 50 Cent, Eminem, and plenty more. Name-dropping them became Game's signature move. At first, it felt like genuine respect, a hungry kid out of Compton tipping his hat to the giants who inspired him. But as time passed, that respect turned into a pattern, and eventually into a running punchline. Memes popped up, jokes spread, and both fans and rappers started clowning the way he leaned on other people's names instead of just standing tall as his own legend. Soon, it wasn't just about lyrical skill anymore. It was about identity. Was Game really carving his own lane, or was he forever hiding in the shadows of bigger stars? What started as homage morphed into habit, and what began as respect started looking like dependency. By now, the ridicule was automatic. His name drops weren't just casual nods anymore. They became part of the story he was building, shaping how audiences viewed him, and just as often, how they judged him. From Dre to 50, from Pac to M, every tale, every contradiction, every controversy added another layer to the way people saw the game. Fans and peers were left constantly asking what's real and what's just embellishment. The more Game talked, the heavier the spotlight got. Every line dissected, every boast measured against his track record. Each move forced people to wonder where the facts ended and the fabrications began. And that leaves us staring at the central question: is the Game's legacy defined by his undeniable talent, or by the stories he keeps spinning around it? His career stands as a wild mix of raw skill, influence, and complicated storytelling. A legacy that stays debated, messy, and impossible to ignore. It's a legacy stitched together by contradictions, where truth and myth keep crashing into each other, leaving fans forever guessing, forever arguing, and still fascinated by the man behind the music. So don't forget, hit that subscribe button to the Gossip channel, drop a like below, and let us know your thoughts in the comments.